Usually when we do a deep dive, we're looking at really complex systems or maybe some obscure history.
Right, or like a new economic model or something.
Exactly. But today, I want to direct your attention to something incredibly mundane. I mean, something so ubiquitous that you've probably never actually stopped to question the mechanics of it.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Yeah, think about turning on a light switch in a dark room. Or, just looking out a window on a sunny
The
afternoon.
most basic, everyday experience.
Right. We have this deep, almost invisible assumption that we know exactly what is happening in that moment.
We think we have it all figured out.
We really do. You flip the switch, and a bulb, or the sun, if you're looking outside, emits these little microscopic bullets.
Those famous little bullets called photons.
Exactly. And we're taught that those photons travel across empty space, they bounce off the walls, they eventually hit the retina in your eye, and boom, your brain registers light.
It's completely intuitive. I mean, it makes perfect sense on a macro level.
It does. It's universally taught in literally every high school physics class on the planet. But what if that entirely intuitive, universally accepted concept is essentially just a deeply ingrained illusion?
A very persistent illusion.
Right. What if there are no bullets and, well, what if nothing is actually traveling at all?
It is the absolute definition of a conceptual blind spot. And it's one that has, frankly, haunted physics for over a century now.
Haunted is a good word for it.
Because we've built an entire technological civilization. I mean, everything from fiber optic internet to laser eye surgery to satellite imaging, all of it relies on the manipulation of light.
We use it constantly.
We do. Yet the foundational story we tell ourselves about what light actually is fundamentally contradicts itself if you look closely enough.
It falls apart.
Completely. We have models that work, but the ontology, the actual physical reality of what is happening under the hood has just been swept under the rug.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sources we are diving into today completely broke and then rebuilt my understanding of something as basic as, well, empty space.
It's a heavy lift conceptually.
It really is. I'm going to be completely honest. I had to read the first few chapters 3 or 4 times before my brain just stopped rejecting it.
That's a very normal reaction, honestly.
Good. I'm glad it's not just me. So we're looking at Sandeep Chavan's provocative 2026 work, Photon Reframed. And I want to set a crucial baseline right from the start, especially if you have any background in physics.
This is an important caveat.
Yeah. Chavan is not trying to debunk quantum mechanics. He isn't saying the math is wrong.
No, the math is spectacular.
Right. The predictive power of quantum electrodynamics is arguably the most successful intellectual achievement in human history. We can predict the magnetic moment of an electron to an absurd number of decimal places.
The math works perfectly. There's no argument there.
So what is he actually arguing then?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Chavan is deliberately going after the ontology beneath the equations. He's shifting our focus from what a photon is to what is actually happening in the universe when a photon appears.
Okay, so separating the math from the physical reality.
Exactly. The standard mathematical models describe the outcomes perfectly. If you set up an experiment, the math tells you exactly where the light will hit and, with what probability.
Right.
But the physics community has essentially maintained this awkward, collective conceptual silence about the underlying physical mechanism.
A conceptual silence. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because we know the inputs, we know the outputs, but the space in between is treated as this mathematical abstraction rather than a physical reality.
So here is the journey we are taking today. We are going to start by completely dismantling what Chavan calls the Courier Myth of traveling light.
Tearing down the old house.
Exactly. We have to tear it down before we can build the new one. Then we are going to rebuild reality from a completely new foundational layer, replacing the whole myth of the empty vacuum.
That's the really paradigm-shifting part.
It is. And once we have that framework, we're going to completely reinterpret the classic physics experiments, the ones that gave us quantum mechanics in the first place.
The big pillars of physics.
Right. And ultimately, we are going to fundamentally change the way you understand space, time, and, well, your own role as an observer in the cosmos.
It is a massive shift. To put it simply, we're moving from a physics of objects to a physics of processes.
Okay, processes over objects.
Right. We are moving away from a universe filled with things that move around to a universe that is a singular structure undergoing constant localized changes.
Let's start with that Courier myth, because Chavan's central thesis hits you like a ton of bricks right in the introduction.
He doesn't pull any punches.
No, he states unequivocally that the photon is not a particle. It is not a wave. and it is absolutely not a carrier of energy moving through space.
Which just sounds crazy at first.
Totally crazy. Instead, he argues that the word photon is simply a label. It's a label for a localized event, a moment of resolution.
Yes.
When I first read that, my immediate thought was, well, if it's not a thing carrying energy, how does the energy get from the sun to my skin to give me a sunburn?
That is the natural follow-up question. And if we connect this to the broader history of physics, we see that the entire discipline has relied so heavily on this idea of transport.
Because of classical mechanics, right?
Yes, exactly. It all stems from classical mechanics. If I throw a baseball to you, energy is transferred because a physical mass literally moved from point A to point B.
Right, the baseball is the courier.
Exactly. And we naturally imported that macro-scale logic right into the quantum realm. We just assume that if energy goes from a light bulb to your eye, some physical entity must have moved across the gap.
We just take it for granted.
We do. But Chavan asks a devastatingly simple question here. What actually moves? When we observe light in an experiment, what do we actually see?
Well, we see the light bulb turn on, and then we see the detector go off.
Precisely. Well, let's look a little closer at that. We see a source change state.
Okay.
For example, an electron in a tungsten filament drops to a lower energy state.
Right.
Then we measure a time delay.
Just a gap in time.
Yes. And then we see a detector change state, like the rhodopsin molecules in the retina of your eye, altering their shape to register a signal.
Okay, so source event, delay, detector event.
That's all we actually observe. We have a source event, a delay, and a detector event. The so-called traveling photon in the space between the source and the detector. That is an inferred imagination.
Wow.
It has never been an observed reality. We just assume it must be there to bridge the gap.
I see what you mean. We observe the departure, and we observe the arrival, and we just fill in the middle with a microscopic mail carrier.
Because that's how our macro brains work.
Right. But the assumption of that transport has caused a century of massive headaches for physicists. I mean, going back to the 1800s, we realized light acts like a wave. Thomas Young showed it diffracts and interferes.
The famous double-slit experiment.
Exactly. But waves need a medium to ripple through, right?
Right.
Ocean waves ripple through water. Sound waves ripple through air. And yet we've been told space is a completely empty vacuum.
The great void.
Yeah. So how does a wave in absolute nothingness?
It's a huge paradox.
And then in the 20th century, we say, okay, fine, it's not a wave, it's a particle. Einstein proved it hits like a bullet.
Right, the photoelectric effect.
But particles don't exhibit continuous interference patterns like waves do. At least not without creating massive paradoxes where a single particle somehow goes through two different doors at the exact same time.
Which makes zero logical sense.
Zero.
And we have essentially normalized this contradiction. The scientific community accepted wave-particle duality, not because it makes elegant logical sense, but because our mathematical models demand it to fit the experimental data.
We just shrugged and said, I guess it's both.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
We have particles that are somehow carriers of energy but have no defined paths, and waves of probability that spread without any physical substance.
It's a mess.
It is. And Chavan points out that this conceptual silence regarding the mechanism of travel is exactly what forces us into these awkward corners.
So if you remove the travel...
If you remove the requirement for a physical courier, the paradoxes begin to dissolve.
Wait, let me try to picture this, because stripping away the idea of travel is incredibly unintuitive. It can get a little abstract if you're just trying to picture it in your head.
Analogies help here.
Okay, let's say we are in a crowded sports stadium.
Okay, I'm with you.
If I write a message on a physical piece of paper and pass it down the road to you, the paper physically travels.
Right, person to person.
That's the classic model. That's the Courier myth, where the photon is the piece of paper. But Chavan is saying, what if there is no paper?
No paper at all.
What if, instead, the stadium crowd does the wave?
Aye.
The wave moves all the way around the stadium, but the people just stand up and sit down in place.
They don't leave their seats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No thing traveled across the stadium. The only thing that propagated from one person to the next was a state of change. Is that a fair way to map what he's arguing?
That structure is incredibly useful for visualizing the difference. In standard physics, even quantum fields are frequently treated as abstract mathematical spaces. Like a grid of numbers, calculating probabilities rather than physical realities.
Just math on a chalkboard.
Right. But Chavan is asking us to look for the actual physical process unfolding. In your stadium analogy, the people represent a structured, continuous medium.
Okay, the medium is the crowd.
Exactly. If nothing material crosses the space between the light bulb and the eye, What is actually propagating is information and influence.
Just the instruction to stand up and sit down.
Yes, it is a sequence of local transitions, just like the fans standing up and sitting down. The wave you see moving is just the visual consequence of localized sequential actions.
Okay, so if nothing is physically traveling from the light bulb to your eye, if there is no microscopic courier carrying a tiny backpack of energy.
Which is a funny image.
Right. But if that's not happening, then what exactly is propagating? The stadium wave needs people. To understand what is happening in the universe, we have to talk about the medium that we've falsely been told is empty space.
We have to fill the vacuum.
Which brings us to the foundational base layer of Chavan's framework.
Right, because if light is a sequence of transitions, there has to be something there to actually undergo the transition.
You can't have a wave with no water?
Exactly. You cannot have a localized change of state if there is no underlying state to begin with.
And this is where Chavan introduces the Universal Energy Dynamics, or UED, framework.
This is the core of it all.
The absolute bedrock of this framework is what he calls structured vacuum energy, or SVE.
SVE.
And let me tell you, this completely dismantles the myth of empty space that we've been taught since grade school. SVE replaces the idea of an empty void with an active, responsive, continuous framework of reality.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere. Under this model, space is not a passive container where things happen. Space is the very mechanism of how things happen.
Now, this raises a massive historical alarm bell, and we really need to address the elephant in the room immediately.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
Anyone with a background in the history of science, hearing the phrase medium in space, will instantly think of the luminiferous aether from the late 19th century.
Oh, absolutely. The Michelson-Morley experiment supposedly killed the ether in 1887, right?
It killed a very specific conception of it, yes. The classical ether was imagined as this invisible fluid, a rigid mechanical substance that light traveled through, much like sound travels through the air.
Like an invisible ocean.
Exactly. It was thought to have a state of absolute rest, which is why Michelson and Morley tried to measure the Earth's movement through it.
They were looking for the wind, basically.
Right, the ether wind. But Chavan is explicitly clear in his text. SVE is not a return to a classical mechanical ether.
Okay, that's a huge distinction.
It's vital. SVE is not a material substance made of smaller parts. It is a structured field of potential with an inherent universal tendency toward equilibrium.
I want to dig into that difference between a mechanical substance and a structured field of potential. Because if you are familiar with modern quantum field theory, or QFT, you already know space isn't totally empty.
Right, QFT already says that.
QFT says space is boiling with virtual particles popping in and out of existence. How is Chavan's SVE different from just standard quantum fields?
So in QFT, the fields are fundamentally probabilistic and quantized.
Okay.
The vacuum expectation value might be non-zero, but the mathematics treat these fields primarily as operators, essentially tools to calculate the probability of a particle manifesting.
Just math tools again.
Mostly, yes. But SVE in Chavan's framework is ontological. It is a singular, continuous, interconnected structure.
It's real physical stuff. Well, not stuff, but a real structure.
Exactly. It doesn't just calculate the odds of an event. It is the physical fabric undergoing the event. It is a tension network.
Okay, a tension network. That helps visualize it.
Think of a spider web.
Oh, I like that. And Chavan introduces two primary drivers that dictate how this tension network behaves.
The drivers of reality.
Right. The first is disturbance, which he labels with the Greek letter delta.
Delta.
Disturbance is an imbalance introduced into the SVE. It's the spark. Because the SVE is highly structured, it naturally resists this imbalance.
It wants to go back to rest.
It wants to remain at equilibrium, yeah. And that brings us to the second driver, resolution.
Disturbance and resolution.
Exactly. Resolution is the system's natural, inherent, automatic response to restore equilibrium.
And this dynamic between disturbance and resolution completely replaces our classical idea of motion.
How so?
Well, think about how this changes the narrative. When a disturbance at delta happens, it doesn't just sit there. Because the SVE is a continuous, interconnected structure, that local disturbance immediately influences the immediate neighboring region.
Like plucking the spider web.
Yes. That neighboring region is forced to respond, which in turn influences the next region.
Passing it along.
That continuous sequence of localized responses, passing the influence forward to resolve the imbalance, is what we have mistakenly been calling propagation or travel.
Let me push back on this a little, because this completely upends how we talk about energy itself.
It really does.
If I have a flashlight and I turn it on, In the classical sense, I think of the battery as a reservoir pumping out an energy substance that shoots out the front.
Right, like a water hose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if I'm understanding UED, energy isn't a noun. It isn't a fluid or a substance that you can put in a box or store in a battery.
Yep.
Energy is just the measurable activity of the SVE trying to fix a disturbance.
That aligns perfectly with Chavan's core argument. Energy is a verb.
A verb.
It
Wow.
is not a substance you can carry, store, or transport. It is the behavior of resolution.
So when it's quiet.
When the SVE is at perfect equilibrium, there is no measurable energy. It is totally quiet. When a disturbance is introduced, the system works to resolve it, and that active process of structural reconfiguration is what we observe and measure as energy.
That is genuinely mind-bending. Energy isn't a thing. It's the action of reality trying to balance itself.
And if we follow that logic, it solves one of the greatest conceptual gaps in modern physics.
Which is?
Well, if energy isn't a material thing, it fundamentally does not need a carrier,
Oh.
right? It doesn't need a photon to transport it in a tiny microscopic backpack across the universe.
Because there's nothing to carry.
Exactly. What we observe as energy transfer from a star to a telescope is actually just the sequential redistribution of an imbalance across the continuous SVE structure.
Okay, but I'm going to be honest. I am still tripping up on one massive hurdle here.
Let's hear it.
If propagation is this smooth, continuous sequence of the SVE restoring its balance like a continuous ripple of tension moving across a spiderweb, why does light hit our instruments like a distinct, discrete particle?
The quantization problem.
Right. Why does a digital camera sensor register individual pixels popping one by one? This is the entire foundation of quantum mechanics, right? The discreteness.
Bullets.
Exactly. If space is smooth, where do the bullets come from?
This is perhaps the most elegant mechanism in the entire book. Chavan doesn't deny the discreteness of the observations.
He can't. Right. It's measurable.
Right, the data is real. But he explains why a continuous underlying process produces discrete, localized events. He introduces a concept called alignment threshold time, or ATT.
Let's dive deep into this, because this is the mechanics of discreteness. ATT is the universal constraint that creates the illusion of particles. How exactly does he define this threshold?
So, alignment threshold time is defined as the maximum allowable time window within which a local disturbance must be resolved for a specific system to maintain its structural stability.
Okay, maximum allowable time window.
Yes. And it's critical to note that ATT is not a single, universal cosmic clock.
It's not the same everywhere.
No, it depends entirely on the specific structure, geometry, and capacity of the local system that is experiencing the disturbance.
So it changes depending on the material.
Exactly. Whether that system is an electron shell, a complex molecule, or a piece of silicon in a camera sensor.
So the disturbance propagates continuously. It builds up, kind of like pressure.
Yes, pressure is a good way to think of it.
But the SVE, or the physical structure embedded in the SVE, can only handle so much imbalance before it has to snap into a new stable state.
It has a breaking point.
If the disturbance cannot be resolved smoothly within that specific ATT window, a local threshold is crossed.
Right.
The system is essentially forced into a sudden, localized, structural transition to clear the imbalance all at once. And Chavan says that sudden completion event is what we call the photon.
Yes. The photon is not an object that arrived from far away. It is the discrete event of a continuous process finally reaching its threshold and completing.
It's an event, not an object.
The discreteness we measure in our laboratories is not a property of the underlying propagation. It is a property of the completion of the resolution.
Let me try to map this to something physical again because I need to see it in my head.
Go for it.
What if it's like a dripping faucet?
Let's explore that.
Yeah.
How does the faucet map to ATT?
Okay, so the water pressure building up in the plumbing, pushing down against the valve, is completely continuous.
Right, the pressure is constant.
It's a smooth, unbroken flow of kinetic pressure. But the water doesn't flow out of the tap continuously. It gathers.
The drop forms.
Yeah. The surface tension of the water holds it together against gravity until a very specific threshold of mass is crossed.
The ATT threshold.
Yes, the tension can't hold it anymore and then drip. A discrete drop falls.
Exactly.
The drop isn't some fundamental, indivisible particle of plumbing that originated miles away at the water tower.
No, it formed locally.
It's just the physical event of the continuous pressure finally resolving at the local threshold of the faucet.
And if we take that faucet analogy a step further, physicists have basically spent the last 100 years staring at the sink, cataloging the sizes of the drops, giving them names, and completely ignoring the continuous pressure building up in the plumbing.
Oh, wow. Oh.
That's exactly what we've done. Quantization. The undeniable fact that light seems to arrive in these distinct chunks or packets isn't about nature being fundamentally made of pixels or building blocks.
It's about thresholds.
It's entirely about structural constraints. The system can only release the imbalance in discrete units because of its own internal threshold limits.
So what does this mean for the absolute bedrock equations of quantum mechanics? The most famous one being E equals h nu, right? Max Planck and Albert Einstein's equation.
The cornerstone of quantum math.
Energy equals Planck's constant times frequency. Conventionally, we are taught that this equation means energy is physically stored in a quantized packet, and the frequency of the light wave tells you how big that packet is.
Right. The higher the frequency, the more energy in the packet.
So blue light has a higher frequency, so it's a bigger, fatter packet of energy than red light.
In the conventional model, yes. But in the UED framework, the mathematical validity of E equals h nu remains perfectly intact.
The math is still right.
The math is right, but the physical interpretation shifts completely. Energy is not stored in a traveling packet. Instead, energy is the intensity of the resolution event.
The intensity, okay.
And that intensity is directly associated with a specific transition rate, which is what frequency actually measures.
So frequency is just a rate of transition.
Exactly. A higher frequency doesn't mean a fatter photon. It means the SVE is undergoing faster, tighter resolution cycles.
It's working harder.
Faster continuous cycles mean a more violent or intense structural reconfiguration is required when that local ATT threshold is finally met.
It's like a faster drip from the faucet hitting the porcelain sink with more force.
That's a great way to put it.
The drop isn't magically heavier, the rate of pressure resolution is just higher.
That's a solid way to visualize the intensity. And this logic also profoundly reframes the most famous constant in all of physics C, the speed of light.
Oh, this is fascinating. Because traditionally, c is defined as the velocity of the photon particle flying through the vacuum of space.
The speed of the Courier.
Right. But if nothing is physically flying, what exactly is c measuring?
If there is no Courier, there is no Courier speed.
Exactly.
In Chavan's framework, C is simply the maximum rate at which the continuous SVE structure can resolve disturbances.
A maximum rate of resolution.
Yes. It is an inherent constraint on how fast transitions can sequentially ripple through the tension network.
So it's not a speed limit for objects.
No, it doesn't measure how fast an object moves. It measures the universal causal limit of the medium itself.
It's the speed limit of reality adjusting itself.
Exactly.
That sounds incredibly elegant in theory. It ties up all these loose ends. But physics relies on hard, empirical, experimental proof.
You have to match the data.
Right. It's one thing to have a beautiful philosophy. It's another to explain real-world data better than the existing models.
Absolutely.
So let's take this UED framework and stress test it against the most famous experiments in quantum history to see if it holds up.
This is the true test of any new ontological framework. If it cannot explain the precise observations we have already cataloged over the last century, it's just philosophical poetry. We have to look at the pillars.
Right. So let's walk through three classic pillars of modern physics, replacing the standard quantum model with Chavan's UED lens.
Where should we start?
Let's start with the big one, the photoelectric effect. This is the exact phenomenon that won Einstein his Nobel Prize in 1921.
A huge moment in history.
Let's do a quick history recap so we know what we are replacing. In the late 1800s, Heinrich Hertz noticed that if you shine ultraviolet light on metal electrodes, it sparks easier.
Right.
Later, physicists realized the light was actually knocking electrons right out of the metal.
Bouncing them right out.
But the weird part was, turning up the brightness of a red light didn't knock any electrons out no matter how bright it was.
You could flood it with red light, nothing happened.
Nothing. But even a very dim blue light knocked them out immediately. Classical wave theory couldn't explain why.
Right, because a brighter wave should have more energy.
Exactly. So Einstein stepped in and said, light is a particle, a photon. The blue photon is a bullet with enough energy to physically collide with the electron and knock it out.
A direct physical collision.
And the red photon is a bullet that is just too weak.
That is the textbook explanation we've used for a century. It's fundamentally a ballistic model.
But Chavan disagrees.
He points out that this does not need to be a physical collision. Remember, in UED, there are no traveling bullets.
Right, no bullets.
Instead, the metal surface itself is a complex SVE structure. It has its own equilibrium and its own local alignment threshold times based on its atomic lattice.
The metal has its own breaking point.
Yes. Light, which is a continuously propagating disturbance, introduces a cyclical imbalance to that metal structure.
Okay, so the metal is feeling the continuous pressure of the disturbance rippling through it.
Yes. And if the rate of those resolution cycles, the frequency of the incident light is high enough, the internal constraints of the metal structure are exceeded.
The threshold is crossed.
The local ATT is crossed. The metal is forced to undergo a sudden local structural reconfiguration to resolve the intense imbalance, and an electron is ejected as a direct byproduct of that reconfiguration.
So it just spits it out to balance itself.
Exactly. It's not being struck by an external object. It is being expelled by the internal rebalancing of the metal's own structure.
So what about intensity? In the classic model, turning up the brightness of the light just means you are shooting a higher quantity of photon bullets at the metal.
In UED, higher intensity simply means a denser, wider field of disturbance.
A wider ripple.
Yes. A denser disturbance triggers more of these local reconfiguration events across a broader area of the metal surface, meaning a higher total number of electrons are ejected.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
The frequency of the disturbance determines if the specific structural threshold can be crossed, and the intensity determines how many local regions cross it simultaneously.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Please do.
Because if you know the history of this experiment, you are probably screaming this at your speakers right now. If this isn't a physical collision of a fast bullet hitting a target, why is there no time delay?
The time delay problem.
Right. When you shine the blue light on the metal, the electron is ejected instantaneously. If this is a process of disturbance building up like pressure in a pipe, shouldn't there be a measurable delay?
You'd think so.
Shouldn't we see the metal kind of heating up with pressure for a few milliseconds before the electron pops out? That instantaneous reaction was exactly why Einstein's bullet model was accepted in the first place.
That is the exact historical crux of the issue, and it's a great question. And Chavan uses the ATT mechanism to answer it perfectly.
How?
Resolution occurs immediately, the very moment the local ATT threshold is met. It's not waiting for a specific threshold of total energy to pool together over time in some slow heating process.
And it's not filling up a bucket.
No. It is a local structural condition reaching an instant point of failure and completion. Because the disturbance propagates through the SVE at C, and the local structure's threshold constraint is absolute, the precise moment the geometric and frequency conditions for resolution are met, the transition happens.
Snap.
Exactly. The suddenness isn't proof of an arriving high-speed particle. It's proof of a rigid structural threshold snapping into a new state without hesitation.
Wow. Okay, it snaps. Let's look at the second pillar, which is famous for completely contradicting the particle model we just talked about.
Interference.
Yes, interference. Specifically, Thomas Young's double slit experiment. This is the one that proves light is a wave.
Right.
You shine a light through two parallel slits in a barrier, and on the wall behind it, you don't get two bands of light. You get a whole spread out pattern of stripes and interference patterns.
Like ripples on a pond.
Conventionally, we are told light acts as waves of probability that physically overlap in empty space, the peaks and troughs canceling each other out, creating that striped pattern on the screen.
And this is where the classical models completely turns down.
Why?
Because if you fire single photons, single bullets, one at a time, through the slits, over time, they still build up that exact same striped interference pattern.
Right, which makes no sense.
A single particle somehow interferes with itself. It's treated as a profound paradox.
But in UED...
In UBD, there are no physical probability waves overlapping in an empty void because there are no physical waves in the classical fluid sense.
So what's causing the stripes?
Instead, the continuous disturbance propagates through the tension network of the SVE. When it hits the barrier with the two slits, the disturbance naturally propagates through both openings simultaneously because the SVE medium itself is continuous.
Okay, the web goes through both doors.
Yes. This creates what Chavan calls coherent transition pathways.
Coherent transition pathways. Let me make sure I'm mapping this correctly. It means the ripple of disturbance is using the geometry of both slits to try and resolve the tension.
Yes. These pathways are essentially geometric patterns of resolution propagating forward through the medium.
Okay.
When these transition pathways meet at the screen in the back, they establish the boundary conditions for where the final resolution event is most likely to complete.
Ah, I see.
The striped pattern we see building up on the screen isn't caused by two physical things bumping into each other mid-air. It is a physical map of the SVE's resolution probabilities based entirely on the spatial geometry of the slits.
So it's one continuous environment trying to balance itself out,
Yeah.
and the physical presence of the slits just forces the environment to balance itself in a striped pattern at the final boundary.
Exactly.
There's no magical single particle going through two doors at once.
No magic required.
The disturbance goes through both doors, and the resolution event happens at the screen.
Precisely. Or rather, to build on that, the SVE acts holistically.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the third pillar, which birthed quantum mechanics in 1900.
Black body radiation.
Yes, Max Planck was trying to solve the ultraviolet catastrophe.
Right. The mystery of why heating an object up doesn't cause it to radiate infinite amounts of high-frequency ultraviolet light.
He solved it by proposing energy is emitted in quantized chunks. So today, conventionally, we say as an object heats up, it glows by emitting quantized photon objects into space.
Right. The hot iron is basically manufacturing and shooting out little discrete packets of heat and light.
In UED, it's totally different. The glowing object is simply a massive, complex system continuously resolving an immense amount of internal thermal disturbance.
So it's just trying to calm down.
It's an equilibrium signature. The atomic structure of the iron is boiling with imbalance. Each time a local atomic region crosses its specific ATT threshold to resolve that intense imbalance, a discrete reconfiguration event occurs, producing observable energy.
Okay.
The spectrum of light we see, the red glow moving to a white-hot glow, is just a statistical distribution of all these billions of resolution events happening across the surface of the object.
So it's not throwing things away.
The iron isn't manufacturing objects and throwing them away into the void. It is continuously, violently reconfiguring itself, and the surrounding SVE is propagating that reconfiguration outward.
And here is the profound beauty of this framework. Because UED perfectly explains the smooth, continuous flow through the double slits, and D, the instant, discrete pop of the photoelectric effect.
Yes.
Without needing two totally different models, a massive historical physics problem just simply vanishes.
It dissolves entirely.
I'm talking about wave-particle duality.
This is perhaps the most philosophically liberating part of Chavan's work.
I couldn't agree more.
Physics has essentially normalized a profound, uncomfortable contradiction for 100 years, that light is both a spread-out, non-local wave and a highly localized, distinct particle.
We literally teach it to students as a fundamental, unsolvable mystery of the universe.
We do.
It's the ultimate, just accepted in science class. You ask your professor how it can be both, and they just say, well, depends on how you measure it. It's a wave on Mondays and Wednesdays and a particle on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
The Copenhagen interpretation literally institutionalized that ambiguity. It made it a rule.
But UED completely dissolves this duality. It shows us that wave-like behavior and particle-like behavior are not two contradictory identities of a single entity.
They are two sequential stages of the exact same continuous physical process.
I was reflecting on this earlier and it hit me. Arguing over wave-particle duality is like a group of scientists arguing for 100 years over whether a specific insect is fundamentally a leaf-eating caterpillar or a flying butterfly.
Oh, that is a fantastic analogy.
Right. They write brilliant, highly predictive equations for the caterpillar's movement and completely separate equations for the butterfly's aerodynamics.
And they call it caterpillar-butterfly duality.
Exactly. But really, it's just a single life cycle. Propagation through the SVE is the caterpillar building up, moving continuously. The discrete photon event is the butterfly instantly emerging from the chrysalis at the threshold.
That is a deeply illuminating way to frame it. You don't need a dual theory of insects. You just need to understand the mechanism of metamorphosis.
Yes, metamorphosis.
In physics, the metamorphosis is the exact moment the ATT threshold is crossed. And this single realization completely demystifies another massive headache in quantum mechanics, the mystery of wave function collapse.
Oh, yes. This is the one that gets co-opted by sci-fi and pop philosophy all the time.
Oh, constantly.
The idea that a quantum system exists in a magical, fuzzy blur of infinite possibilities, Schrodinger's cat being both alive and dead until a conscious observer looks at it.
Right, and then reality magically collapses into one definite state.
It makes us feel very important.
Chavan strips all the mysticism and anthropic privilege away from this. In standard quantum mechanics, measurement is often treated as this special, almost magical act of observation that forces the universe to make a choice.
But in UED...
In UED, collapse is stripped of its philosophical baggage. Collapse is just the physical completion of a resolution process. That's it.
It's just the end of the transaction.
It is the event of the SVE reaching equilibrium at a specific point.
So when I set up a detector to measure a photon, I'm not using my consciousness to collapse a probability wave.
That's not at all. Chavan explicitly warns against treating human measurement as a special act. Measurement is just a physical interaction between two systems.
Two systems interacting.
And an interaction is just a local point where the SVE resolves the disturbance. The disturbance was distributed, propagating across multiple pathways, like through the double slits.
Right.
At the detector screen, the local spatial conditions meet the critical threshold, resolution physically completes at that specific geometric point, and the propagating imbalance is cleared.
The wave is gone.
The supposed collapse of the wave function is simply the SVE successfully finishing its job of rebalancing.
So what does this all mean for us? I mean, if light isn't a traveling object, and the photon is just a localized event of structural completion,
It's a huge shift.
this completely rewrites not just a beam of light from a flashlight, but the entire cosmos. It rewrites space, time, and our literal place in the universe. Let's zoom all the way out to the macroscopic scale. How does UED change cosmology?
Well, if we accept SVE, and we accept that propagation is just a continuous sequence of localized transitions, the macro universe changes fundamentally.
Right.
Let's start with the concept of space itself.
Right, because if SVE is real, space is no longer a passive, empty vacuum holding stars and planets like marbles in a jar.
No, space is the structured vacuum energy.
So if space isn't an empty gap between things, what is distance?
It redefines distance completely.
If I look at a galaxy a billion light years away, what does that distance actually mean in UED?
Distance is no longer defined as a physical void that must be crossed by an object flying at speed.
Okay.
In UED, distance is defined conceptually as transition depth.
Transition depth.
Yes, it is the total number of sequential structural transitions required for a disturbance to propagate between two regions of the SVE.
So it's about the number of steps.
Exactly. If a star is extremely far away, it simply means a phenomenally massive number of sequential SVE reconfigurations must occur before the initial disturbance influences your local region.
You aren't measuring miles or kilometers, you're measuring a chain of events.
A very, very long chain of events.
Transition depth. That fundamentally changes the ontology of the night sky, and it has to change how we view the expanding universe too. Let's unpack cosmic redshift.
Oh, this is a major one.
Conventionally, since the 1920s with Edwin Hubble, we look at distant galaxies, and we see that their light is shifted toward the red end of the spectrum.
It's stretched out.
Right. We are told this proves that the physical fabric of space itself is stretching like a rubber balloon, literally pulling the light waves apart as they travel through the void.
Stretching the waves.
Yeah. But Chavan offers a radically different interpretation of the cosmological data.
He has to, right, because if there are no traveling light waves physically moving through space to be stretched, what is redshift actually measuring?
Exactly.
In UED, redshift is a structural signature of the evolving dynamics of the SVE itself. Over massive cosmological scales, the baseline conditions for resolution slowly shift.
The tension network changes over time.
Yes, the underlying tension structure of the SVE is dynamically adapting. As a continuous disturbance propagates through this slowly evolving medium, the pattern of sequential transitions naturally changes,
Resulting in the redshift.
resulting in an observed shift in the transition rate, the frequency. It is not necessarily space physically expanding like a balloon. It is the fundamental process of SVE resolution slowly shifting its rhythm over billions of years.
I'm going to need a second to process that.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. Okay, so if space is transition depth, what about time? Because this part of the book really challenged my everyday perception.
Time is always the tricky one.
Time is not an external, independent river flowing past us. There isn't a giant universal clock ticking outside the universe.
No, and classical relativity already hints at this, but UED grounds it physically. In UED, time is simply the sequence of transitions.
Time is the sequence.
It emerges directly from the process of resolution. The duration of any physical event is just a measure of how many sequential steps the SVE takes to complete its unfolding.
So if nothing happens, there's no time.
If there are no transitions, there is no time. Space and time are not a background stage where the play of the universe happens. They are the emergent, observable properties of structure and sequence.
And if space is transition depth, and time is the sequence of transitions, what about the observer? What about you listening to this, trying to comprehend your place in this framework?
That's the ultimate question.
Under the old classical model, the observer is an external agent. You are looking into a fishbowl. You are fundamentally separate from the light hitting your eye.
You are the target. The light is the bullet.
Right. But in UED,
In UED, the observer is an internal, physically participating system. You are part of the SVE. You are made of it.
we are the tension network, too.
Exactly. Your eye, your retina, the visual cortex in your brain, they're all highly complex, structured configurations within this universal tension field.
So when I see something,
When you see light, your eye is not catching a tiny physical baseball thrown from a distant star. Your eye is actively participating in the localized resolution of a cosmic disturbance.
this is the exact realization that gave me actual chills when I finally understood it. Think about the profundity of this.
It's incredibly profound.
When I go outside tonight and look up at a distant star, I am not being bombarded by ancient, microscopic particles that miraculously survived a billion-year journey across a cold, empty void.
No, you're not a target.
I am personally serving as the physical completion point for an imbalance that started a billion years ago. My retina is providing the specific alignment threshold time for the universe to rebalance itself.
You are the final puzzle piece.
I am not a passive target. I am the resolution event.
It is a breathtaking synthesis of physics and ontology. Reality is not a collection of isolated objects in motion, randomly bumping into each other in the dark.
It's all one thing.
It is a continuous, unbroken, singular unfolding of disturbance, propagation, and resolution. Everything is intimately physically connected through the SVE.
It's a beautiful way to see the universe.
When you look at a star, you are physically linked to it by an unbroken, sequential chain of transitions. You are the final, necessary link in that specific chain.
We've covered an immense amount of conceptual ground today.
Really have.
We started by dismantling the Courier Myth, the deeply ingrained false idea that light is a tiny physical object traveling through an empty void.
Good riddance to the bullets.
Exactly. We explored how Sandeep Chavan replaced that classical void with structured vacuum energy, an active, responsive medium that forms the bedrock of reality.
And we saw how energy is not a stored substance, but the observable activity of resolution, a verb, not a noun.
Right. We delved into how alignment threshold time forces continuous rippling disturbances to snap into discrete completion events, giving us the mathematical illusion of particles.
The dripping faucet.
The dripping faucet, yeah. We took those new concepts and we completely rewrote the history of quantum mechanics. We solved the photoelectric effect without bullets, we solved interference without overlapping probability waves, and we dissolved wave-particle duality.
We turn the caterpillar and the butterfly back into a single, cohesive process of metamorphosis.
We learned that the photon isn't a thing, it's a clue. We replaced objects with processes, and we replaced movement with sequential resolution.
And in doing so, we found a universe that is far more cohesive, far more rational, and far more connected than the models of the 20th century allowed us to imagine.
I want to leave you with a specific lingering thought to mull over today. Sometime tomorrow, go outside and look closely at a dark shadow cast by the sun on the pavement.
A shadow.
Yes, just a simple shadow. Under the old model of physics, that shadow is simply a cold, dead area. It's a place where photon particles were physically blocked by a solid object. It is defined entirely by an absence of things.
This is emptiness.
But under Chavan's UED framework, that shadow is something entirely different, and I think strangely beautiful.
It's an island.
It is. That shadow is a localized region where the structured vacuum energy is sitting at perfect, quiet equilibrium. It is entirely unbothered by the violent, cascading sequence of disturbances continuously resolving all around it in the bright light.
It's a temporary island of perfect balance.
Exactly. Next time you feel completely overwhelmed by the chaos of the world, remember that your very nature, your fundamental physical ontology, isn't made of static objects violently colliding in a void.
You're not just bumping around in the dark.
You are a highly dynamic, beautifully structured system, continuously finding your equilibrium. Reality isn't just happening to you, reality is resolving through you.